Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Joe on Joe. It's me, your host, Joe Slepsky, and this is the only podcast where we watch every single episode of G.I. Joe, a real American hero, the cartoon, in sequential order, and we comment on it mystery, science, style. I'm really excited this week. I've got a guest. He's a new friend of mine. He was introduced by our longtime friend of the show, David Schrader, and he's he's a dirtbag. No, my guest today, he's a writer. He's a very prolific writer. He's written films, TV. He has his brand new comic book that is just hit the stands this month. The second issue is going to hit what the week after this episode airs. It's called Aberrant. It's from Action Lab Comics. His name is Rylend Grant. Rylend, welcome to Joe on Joe.
I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited, man. You've worked on a lot of cool things. You've got some really great, like, what's the phrase? Bona fides, so to speak.
Bona fides is a great word. Can I steal that?
Yeah, totally. Totally. You've had what was it? You've been like listed on like the top 50 unproduced scripts. You were on the blacklist 2 times, right?
Yes.
You
twice.
won the Final Draft Big Break competition in 2004. You've worked with Ridley Scott, Lorenzo Di Bonaventura, Johnny Depp, John Woo, Luc Besson, Penelope Cruz, like all kinds of crazy names that everyone knows. And now you're dipping your toe into the Action Labs comic book world.
Yeah. I mean, what you're sort of very cleanly skirting, and I appreciate it, is that I have been paid very handsomely to write big bad Hollywood films for 12 plus years right now. And it's a good life. I just bought a really nice house in Eagle Rock, but I have yet to have my name on anything.
Sure. So is that a contractual thing that you can't talk about it that you've worked on? Because I know, I know that when you see these big movies, they even may list 6 writers, but they've had actually 12 people work on it.
Yeah, well, it is. Here's the thing: is like, yes, sometimes that's the case. Sometimes, really, it's in poor taste. I mean, if my name's not on it, I don't. I'm not going to say, oh well, you should have seen that script before I got a hold of it.
Right. I agree.
Yeah, and Hollywood is full of like jerks that do that. That's not really my game. But
I appreciate that.
I have a lot of stuff in the pipe too. There's a lot of stuff that. There's a distinct possibility that I could have 3 movies go into production this year. So. But yeah, I mean, I have rewritten or punched up a good handful of movies that you've seen. I've made really bad films slightly more palatable. I've made pretty decent films like a little bit better. I'd like to think that, but yeah.
At the end of the day, your check's cash.
Yeah, it beats working for a living, and. And so now I've, comics was always something that I was really passionate about. It was kind of my first love. I was, one of these jerks that got hooked in when I was a kid by the Death of Superman arc, and but thankfully, I mean that got me into a comic shop, and then like the Image Revolution was happening, and then I found McFarlane, Spider-Man, and then came Garth Ennis and Brian Azzarello, and I wanted to do this for a really long time, but it was really hard for a while. You basically had to know artists that were kind of in your neighborhood. People are working on like physical drawings and coloring by hand and all that stuff, and just over the last maybe 5 years, it got so much easier to do this, like with digital workflow and Facebook groups, and so it was just like there was no reason not to do it at some point, and so I went and found some artists and got some stuff going. I have 4 titles in the pipe now.
Wow.
And again with Skype and Facebook and all this stuff, I have 2 artists in Brazil.
Oh, great!
I have an artist in Mexico, an artist in Hungary. My go-to colorist is in Indonesia, and my letterer is in the UK. We communicate almost exclusively via email. I pay by PayPal, and it's it's a new world, man. It's awesome.
It's really, yeah, that's really great. You hear, if you're a fan of like comic genre and stuff, you read stories. I read the amazing Back Issue magazine. I don't know if anyone else listening reads that, but they always tell stories about like in the 70s, these like hunts to find artists around the world. And so there was like a Filipino revolution and stuff. And you read about it, and it takes the place like 10 years, a 10-year span of comics where they slowly flooded the market. And now with a click of your mouse, you can reach an artist literally anywhere in the world and hire them to do your job without like this 10-year waiting period. It's amazing.
Yeah. There are these massive Facebook groups like connecting comic writers and artists, and with like 50,000 members. And it's just a gallery. It's just these incredible artists from every corner of the universe, just being like, "Hey, here's some work. Hey, here's some work. Here's some work." And you spend an hour going through there. You find 5 artists that you fall in love with, and international artists, they're about half the price of an American artist, and they have about half the attitude, half the ego. I don't mean to bash American artists, but I've had some real luck.
Well, comic books are that weird. Not to bash anyone in the industry, but it is that weird profession, I think, where your celebrity far outweighs the majority of the people's earning potential. Like there's, like you get some real celebrities in comic books, but the pay rate is such that they can't live like the celebrity that they kind of are in those circles. And so there's a weird ego. I've seen it happen in good ways and bad ways. There's like this weird sense of ego that happens when they then can't like live the lifestyle. Does that make sense? You see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes total sense because, I make a good living as a TV film writer, but, you don't make a lot of money with comics.
It's funny. You're kind of
very much a labor of love.
You're kind of the opposite in that we don't know your name. Because you haven't gotten the byline, but you've gotten paid, and you're living in a lovely home right now. That's so funny. Well, listen, we're gonna get your name out there right now to the Joe and Joe audience. So there's a small dedicated group of followers that are gonna know you right now, Rylend.
Yeah, go out and buy like 50 books a piece.
Yes. So here's the deal. So the book is called Aberrant. So I've read the first issue. I skimmed through the PDFs on a couple of the other ones. It looks fantastic. I would say it's a kind of a cross between like G.I. Joe meets The Boys meets like Universal Soldier, something like that. Would you agree?
I love G.I. Joe. I love The Boys. Ennis is a hero, and I very much appreciate the Universal Soldier reference. Yeah, I mean, I've heard any number of things. Like, some people have called it 24 with superheroes, which I think it sounds pretty cool.
Oh yeah.
For me, I was really channeling. Again, I'm a filmmaker by trade, screenwriter by trade. I have a master's in directing from the American Film Institute. I have a degree in film history from the University of Michigan. So I was trying to do a filmic book, and specifically I was trying to channel like those really great 70s paranoid kind of like spy thrillers.
Mm-hmm. Like 3 Days of the Condor.
And it's great that you mentioned that. I mean, my go-to elevator pitch is basically that Aberrant is like a military slanted 3 Days of a Condor. Like if there was a snarling, superpowered badass waiting around every corner, sort of like hell-bent on stomping a mud hole in Robert Redford. That's kind of what it is. Like conversation, Marathon Man, and then I guess more recently, movies like Michael Clayton and Enemy of the State kind of channeled those same things. So that's what I'm trying to do. It's very much it's very much twists and turns, and there's this conspiracy happening, and you think this person is behind it, and then somebody else is behind it. But yeah, there's a lot of G.I. Joe influence. I mean, I think back to the G.I. Joe comic book got into a lot of this stuff. Where what was the name of the
Larry Hama?
Well, no, Larry Hama, of course, is. But I was thinking the Jugglers. Remember the Jugglers?
Oh, the Jugglers, yes.
Yeah, this sort of mysterious group of American generals that were sort of like trying to, sort of playing chess behind the scenes, and
Yep.
they were sort of trying to, manipulate G.I. Joe to its own end, and they were in league with Cobra sometimes, and those were really good sort of formative stories, and there's a lot of that working here in Everett.
There really is. And also what I was thinking, the G.I. Joe influence was that kind of like what Larry did, is he gave, and it's a good writer skill, so it shows that you know what you're doing. All of your characters are so unique. And not to spoil anything that happens, but it's a military book, so people die. And in a very short period of time, you really give a lot of characterization and a lot of really character moments to these people that may or may not survive that long. And it's really well done. It's very smart. It's not just cannon fodder.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny. I mean, I think about exactly what you're talking about is kind of like characterizing that military team in the beginning of the first issue. The first issue, is sort of fueled by this kind of special forces team that is responding to this terrorist hostage situation in Algeria, and characterizing that team. I didn't think of it until like I was sort of prepping to go on the Joe on Joe podcast, but it's like those guys are so inspired by like the G.I. Joe file cards. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
where you can just sum these guys up in a thimble full of information. And those file cards, always so much character, and then it was just sort of oozing. And yeah, I mean, I didn't realize until right now maybe that like just how much I sort of stole from G.I. Joe in this comic. And again, I mean, it's I sort of mean it as a tribute, I think.
Yeah, man. Well, listen, I don't think anyone's going to complain. G.I. Joe is a great place to take from because it's the wellspring from, I think, a lot of our imaginations. They were formed around this stuff. So growing up, did you grow up you said you went to University of Michigan. Is that where you're from?
I am from the Detroit area. Yeah,
okay.
Detroit proper. Actually, I grew up in a housing project in Detroit, and yeah.
Nice.
And then,
And were you into the show first, or the toys, or the cartoon? Like, what was your entree into G.I. Joe?
Yeah, I was young, and so it was probably it was a show action figure combo. You and I have talked about this a little bit already, but so here's the thing: is like I write now for a living, and I write in an office that is filled with all of the toys that I grew up with.
It's true.
And
I've seen the pictures; they're amazing.
I have shelves full of individual G.I. Joes, and they're the actual G.I. Joes that I had when I was a kid, and I still have my vehicles. And so here's the thing: is like the best stories I ever told, I told with my action figures when I was a kid, and probably the first salvo. And that little war I fought growing up was G.I. Joe. And I would tell these elaborate stories with them. I would take all my G.I. Joes, and we would, I would have like huge, like Kumite, like karate tournaments with all of them.
Kumite!
And to show what a child of like the late 80s, early 90s I was, like, my stalker figure would be Bo Jackson, and he would kick all of Joe's asses. And
sure. Well, of course, it was Bo Jackson. I mean, that's the Tecmo rule. The Tecmo rule. Anything Bo Jackson, he needs to dominate. Absolutely.
Yeah, Bo Jackson was unstoppable. So Joe was like it was my first love when I was a kid, and the first stories I told were with my Joe figures, and I fell in love with that cartoon. I mean, there were just great episodes of the cartoon. I mean, you had stinkers here and there. Or you just had, whatever garden variety episodes.
Sure.
They were, I think about like the Springfield episode where like,
oh, it's so good.
Yeah, Shipwreck's sort of being like psychologically tortured by Cobra, and it's almost like this really twisted episode of the Twilight Zone, and then the Worlds Without End episode.
The Worlds Without End's the best. Yeah.
Yeah, the alternate universe, the parallel dimension where like Cobra won, and it's just that the reason I'm telling, I tell a lot of like big bad sci-fi stories now. That's what I'm getting. I'm just known in Hollywood as kind of a big idea guy, and actually, two of the movies I have that might go this coming year are big twisted sci-fi ideas, and the seeds were planted with like those early Joe episodes, and of course they grew when, that made me curious for Twilight Zone and curious for Star Trek episodes, and But yeah, it was. I mean, GI Joe was really formative, and of course there was Thundercats, and of course Silverhawks and Transformers and all these things. But GI Joe was like the A+ show, to those like A- B+ shows.
It's so great to hear. I love that.
Yeah.
So now, if you want to hear more about Rylend and his love for GI Joe, and just everything that he's going on, you can go online and you can follow him on Facebook and Twitter at Rylend Grant. Now you spell Rylend RYLEND Grant. So at Rylend Grant, find him on Facebook and Twitter. While you're online, check me out at Joe on Joe Pod. That's for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Send me an email to joeonjoepod@gmail.com. Visit patreon.com/joeonjoepod and sign up for our Patreon. We do the comic book exclusive podcast where we're going through every single issue of the comic book. Last week, you guys got issue number 25. So by now, I think we've got 26, maybe even 27 up on the Patreon. For only $3 a month, you get access to all that content. It's fantastic. Now,
love it.
Yeah, so now if you want to meet Rylend in person, here's what you guys got to do. You got to go to San Diego Comic-Con. I mean, that's not the only place. Literally, you could probably find him at like a Ralph's. You could go, stalk him. We know from this conversation he's an Eagle Ridge, Eagle Rock.
Yeah,
okay. Thank you for you're narrowing it down even further. But he's at San Diego this year. I'm really excited for him. He's at San Diego, and he's doing. There's 2 panels. He's doing a signing for his book. So let's see. Let's go through it. So first of all, you go to the Action Labs booth. And you can find him. He's signing on Friday at noon, and he's signing his comic Aberrant, the second issue, which should be hitting at the end of July. The first issue's in your local comic shop right now. So hit him up on Friday at noon at the Action Lab comic book booth. And on Thursday at 7:30, he's working a panel called Directing Your Comics, which is going to be like giving comics a cinematic flair. Is that right?
Giving your comics a cinematic flair. It's I have 2 other creators. I have David Pepos, who created Spencer and Locke.
I know David. Yeah.
Pepos is a great guy, and then I have Sean Lewis, who did The Few and Coyotes for Image, and
cool.
a couple other great books. And basically, it takes a look at the writer-artist relationship. It's kind of about scripting specifically for an artist, and I immediately cast the writer as the director of the book, and then extending that metaphor, the artist becomes the cinematographer, production designer, and then Pepos and Lewis immediately disagree with me, and then we kind of fight it out.
That's great. I met David at I'm not sure if I've met him, and we got along pretty well actually, and it's on me to follow up, and I haven't. He did a signing at Golden Apple Comics, and what a nice dude.
He's a great guy.
It's for his
He's
book.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's for his book Spencer and Locke, which is kind of like a modern real world update of Calvin and Hobbes. And wonderful book. So check it out. So if you please tell him I said hi. And so I mentioned Golden Apple Comics. You also have this other exciting thing which is coming up. There was another big comic shop in LA called Meltdown Comics. It recently closed. And Meltdown used to host comic book creator lessons by our friend Jim Higgins, who's fantastic. And he would do like how to write comics. They would have how to draw comics, all these classes. And that's really where you kind of helped craft Aberrant. Is that right?
Yeah, I wanted to do it for a really long time. And Jim's class at Meltdown kind of provided the structure. And I met a lot of great people there, a lot of creators, and just, he was doing it for a really long time. And just over the years, there were just a ton of great, major indie releases created inside Meltdown. And
hey, I took the class. Hey, I put my ash can out there in the world.
Nice. Yeah. And so, Aberrant debuted, and my dream was always to do kind of a launch party, a release party at Meltdown. And unfortunately, as you know, I assume a lot of your LA-based listeners know, kind of as soon as I started planning the party, Meltdown had to close.
Yep.
Their rent got jacked up, and they decided to sort of shutter, which was sort of devastating to me. It was my local. Short and sweet, like I'm still throwing the party, kind of as a tribute to this shop that I loved, and a tribute to Jim, and a tribute to that sort of comic creation legacy. So I now have I think 20 different creators
Wow.
committed, and we have more jumping on every day. And so we're throwing a big party on August 25th at a shop called Quest in downtown Los Angeles. We're going to do a couple of panels there with Jim and some of the other creators. There are going to be 20 creators there with their books signing. There's going to be a food truck. It's going to be wild.
That's awesome. That's really exciting. Yeah, that's really great. So if you're in the LA area, keep your eyes peeled for that. Is there like a Facebook page or anywhere people can go to get information on it?
Yeah, there will be. We just locked the date in, so you can hit me up on Facebook or Twitter, and I will point you to the Facebook group
Awesome.
once it's created. Yeah.
Awesome. Love it.
Yep.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Yeah. And support Jim Higgins. He's a really hell of a nice guy, and he's a very talented. He used to be an editor at DC Comics.
Yeah, and I should say, as long as you're saying that, is that Jim is now teaching at the Society of Illustrators in Eagle Rock. So look him up. Great classes there. Yeah.
He's great. He's super knowledgeable. So listen, and even if you're remote, I'm sure he would figure out a way to. I don't know if he does teach remotely right now, but like we were talking earlier, the internet is making everything possible. You don't need to be in the same city to teach. So I'm sure Jim would love it if some people reached out and said, "Hey, I want to learn how to write comic books." So if you're interested, you know how to find both of us. Hit us up. We'll get you in contact with Jim. He's a really knowledgeable dude. Back in the day, I know he worked on those big books that DC put out from Paradox Press. You remember those like Big Book of Urban Legends and stuff like that? Yeah.
He also worked on a history of violence, which is pretty impressive. And then Road to Perdition was another thing that he worked on.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a lot of interesting credits. I mean, the guy's been around for a long time.
Yeah, and he's a heck of a nice guy. So, if you're out there and you want to dip your hand into making some comic books, reach out to us. We'll get you in contact with him. He's a great resource for you. Well, Rylend, are you ready to watch today's episode, which is D-Day at Alcatraz Part 1?
I'm so wildly excited right now.
I am so torn with this episode because I really like it and then I really hate it.
It's really funny. I just like before we dive too much into it, I love that like Alcatraz was so hip and so awesome right around this time. Like every show had to have like an Alcatraz episode. Like it was just I remember like Unsolved Mysteries doing like big exposés on like the Alcatraz escape and all this stuff. It was just like in the ether then, and so of course G.I. Joe had to hit it.
Oh, of course. I mean, yeah, come on. Yes, Alcatraz is like, listen, the movie The Rock said everything you need to know about Alcatraz, So I'm really excited. I can't wait to get into this episode with you. So if you guys at home, you're all set. Thanks again for listening. Thanks for reaching out and saying hi to Rylend. And let's get into the show. Hit play now. So the question I've got for you is, was this your era or was the other, because you were talking earlier about, like the Worlds Without End and the No Place Like Springfield episodes, which is like the Sunbow stuff. Did you see any of these DIC episodes at all?
Yeah, I did, but I was less enthralled with the DIC episodes. So I actually I don't remember this one, but it was the earlier episodes that I was really kind of enthralled with, when I was a kid, and that were just kind of like on repeat constantly, seemingly.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, and this is totally anecdotal, it was probably more of a feature that like I just wasn't in front of the TV at the same time as I got older, but I feel like I didn't see these in rotation in reruns as much as I did the originals. But
totally.
Yeah, but that just might be that by the time these would have been in rotation, I was not in front of the TV during those hours, So D-Day at Alcatraz, written by David Karen and J. Larry Carroll.
Yeah. These guys are like prolific.
They are.
I recognize these guys because I was a big Star Trek: The Next Generation geek, and I looked them up, and they were on Thundercats. I think they were writing partners. They wrote on Thundercats. They wrote on Mario Brothers. They wrote on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Dennis the Menace, Camp Candy, the Super Dave cartoon.
Wow.
Yeah, and then they transitioned into they did a season of The Next Generation, and then I think they kind of clean house on The Next Gen because the first season was a little bit hokey.
Yeah,
and then these guys went on to write Walker Texas Ranger and Stargate, and yeah, they were on for a long time.
That's very cool. I want to say, since there were two of them, I want to say everything awesome is one person and everything cheesy is the other guy.
Yeah, I'm sure they blame each other. It's the media. I write a lot of my movie stuff with a partner.
Yeah. You mentioned that. No, who's your writing partner?
His name is Dikran Ernekian. We went to college together, and then we moved out here together. I went to AFI. He went to USC, and I wrote for a while on my own. And then he was Stephen Summers' assistant for a couple of years.
That's exciting for Joe and Joe listeners because, of course, he was his assistant during the years leading up to Stephen Summers directing G.I. Joe: The Rise of Cobra.
Yeah, his final job was being he left Stephen Summers' company right after Joe, and so we were at that point writing the script that kind of broke us as a team, this thing that ended up on the blacklist, and we were writing it inside Stephen Summers' office while he was on set at Joe, and so
oh wow.
So I kind of experienced the entire G.I. Joe movie experience.
So crazy. So and maybe the answer is we get him on the show. We do a movie specific podcast. But are there any anecdotes you can share with us that our listeners would love to hear without putting anyone on Front Street or
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of ones. I mean, it was just, it's not a good movie. Let me say that, and that's not Dikran's opinion. That's my opinion, and I think probably most of your listening audience's opinion.
It's got its issues, sure.
But there's a reason for that. I mean, basically, it's one of these things where it was like, it was Lorenzo de Bonaventura who produced that, and they had the. Basically, like Sony had or Paramount, had the license from Mattel, and they were going to lose it if they didn't make it in time. And so they had to rush a movie into production.
It's always a recipe for quality film.
Yeah, always a recipe.
We're losing the rights. Quick, make it.
And it was just, they had three writers or three different writing teams working at the same time. And like Stuart Beatty wrote a draft, and Stuart Beatty's a great screenwriter who wrote Collateral and a number of other things. They had Koppelman and Levine writing a draft. Koppelman and Levine did Rounders, and now they've created Billions. I don't remember who the third writer was, but basically, so they had three scripts going on at the same time, and a lot of Dikran's job was to take part from here and take a part from there.
Oh,
and slap them together and try to make sense of it. And so, it's almost like they were just taping pieces of different movies together, and that's how you end up with this thing. So that was a crazy ride. My fondest memory was we're in the office writing, and again, Dikran's basically an assistant, and so Stephen Summers' daughter was like 13 at the time, and she was on spring break from school, and she and a bunch of her friends from school were in Hawaii with Stephen's wife, and it ended up being they were like in love with Channing Tatum at that point.
Well, hunky, who isn't?
So Dikran had to orchestrate this call between like 6 13-year-old girls and Channing Tatum on the set of G.I. Joe. And the assistant connects the call and then has to sit there and listen to it. And so we're sitting in this office listening to these 13-year-old girls lose their minds because they're talking to Channing Tatum, being like, "Oh my God, it's Channing Tatum!"
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Well, let's check in on the show real quick. We opened up on a kind of an average action scene in the Arctic, and Cobra got captured, and it was tricky because Destro seemed very interested in being captured. In fact, Cobra Commander, they had to keep Heavy Metal from running away. So now they've all been sent to The Rock. And in this world, The Rock was not closed down in 1963 by Robert F. Kennedy. The Rock is still a functional prison, the escape-proof Alcatraz. And they've got a, familiar sounding, very gruff female warden. It is kind of putting Pathfinder in his place right now. So we did get our first taste of the too cartoony aspect, which we're about to get a big taste of. When they were getting handed their prison uniforms, there was that like cartoon like boink, boink, which is here we go. So if you're watching along, you just heard basically the voice of Mr. McSeedleplick.
The ghost of Alcatraz, that's who
I'm not sure what to say, Rylend.
Yeah, it's a little bit rough. I mean, there are a lot of things that you kind of have to eat watching this. Like,
Yeah.
I don't really understand. Like, so Cobra went to jail, and it just seems like a really bad plan, right? It's like we want to attack. We want to get this submarine from San Francisco. We want to stage an attack, and so our plan is to go to prison first. I don't really understand that, but the biggest thing is like, so these guys are in jail, but they have somehow been allowed to keep their masks and their like weaponized eyewear.
Totally. And Destro, according to this look, Destro has gold-plated arms.
Yes.
Destro doesn't have gold-plated arms. Destro has a gold helmet. His arms are human arms.
Yeah.
But according to this look, he's got gold-plated arms. So we're gonna go to commercial break right now, and we'll be right back.
Stay tuned. G.I. Joe will return.
Today's file card features on the Cobra Naut, the Astro Viper. Satellite surveillance technology is absolutely vital to modern military intelligence. Intricate tracking satellites must be maintained and repaired on site. And as Cobra's network of eyes in the sky grows older, more and more repairs are needed, necessitating more technicians capable of withstanding repeated high-G launchings and enduring long terms in orbit. Quote, Cobra Nauts are recruited from the ranks of the Stratovipers, those Night Raven pilots who are naturally and artificially conditioned for high-altitude flying and high-G maneuvering. Cobra Nauts pilot the launch and recovery vehicles, man the orbital stations, and do the satellite repair work. They like it up there where it's cold and dark. I never even heard of an Astro Viper, a Cobra Naut. I had no idea that this guy was even a thing, primarily I think because like Cobra didn't really do spaceships. Like the G.I. Joe had the Defiant and all that. It seems weird to me that they would put out a Cobra Naut, but there was no real Cobra space vehicles, unless I'm completely missing something. So this guy came out in 1988. The following year, G.I. Joe would come out with the Crusader, which was like a mini space shuttle, and the Defiant came out in 87. Cobra never had a space weapon thing. So I'll bet you he was kind of originally designed as a counterpart for the Defiant, which had come out the year prior. You know, like kind of like, hey, let's give the Joes a guy to fight in space because there were really no other space guys to do. And you got to be honest, having said all that, I kind of like the way he looks. He's a good looking dude. He's got this sweet, like full cast helmet that with a yellow triangular visor on it. Cool backpack. He's got handles on the backpack to like control it. There's hoses that stick out. I always love when hoses connect to it. And the colors are great, red and black with the gold piping on it. It's a good looking character. I like him. I just think it's weird that they would just come out with an astronaut but no actual vehicles to go with him. Like, this is a man who needs a ride, everybody. Where's Space Force when you need it? So listen, Cobra Naut, Astro Viper, whoever you are, wherever you are, we salute you. And I can always forgive the kind of insanity of a plan. You know, like for whatever reason, in order to hijack this Comstock load, they have to be in Alcatraz, and that's the part of it that I'm always like, okay, we're watching a cartoon, suspension of disbelief, suspension of cartoon belief, whatever you want to call it. But it's the like, did we need to layer on a ghost?
Yes.
Did we need a ghost? No, we didn't.
Yeah, well, I mean that's that happened all too often. It's like, okay, well, pretty good plan, and it's like somebody falls into quicksand or somebody gets attacked by a bobcat.
A haunted quick. 24. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, haunted quicksand and a spectral bobcat.
Yeah, definitely staples of these like 80s cartoons, whether it was Thundercats or Silverhawks or anything.
This episode does have something that's absolutely speaks to your ability as a writer. This has some more wonderful characterization of Captain Gridiron, only speaking in football metaphors. only in football metaphors.
Yeah, do you think they ever run out? I mean, it's like...
I hope not. It's on point, this episode. And we just watched Cobra Commander eat soup through his mask.
It's amazing. And he was singing like a really amazing song there, too. Like, a little bit hard to hear with the volume turned down here, but kind of amazing. But yeah, Captain Gridiron is like, the guy was amazing. Like, you look back at his file card, and one of these like nice Larry Hama twist where he passed up an appointment to the Army War College to join the infantry because, quote unquote, that's where the action is.
Yeah, that's
badass, awesome action movie stuff.
Great.
That just has Hama written all over it. And then also Captain of the West Point football team. Thomas Magnum was the captain of the Navy football team.
Was he really? Well, that brings us to the next point of conversation. Is you're a massive fan of like 80s action TV shows like Magnum PI, A-Team, the Fall Guy, probably Riptide. You probably were into Riptide.
Riptide is so amazing.
Hardcastle McCormick, maybe.
Yeah.
Like I loved all that stuff too. Let's get into that. How does that influence the kind of work you do today?
It's so formative. I mean, I do a lot of crime movies. I do a lot of mystery movies. I do a lot of action movies. I've actually written for the directors of 5 of the last 8 Fast and the Furious movies.
Awesome.
And I think.
Oh, wait, real quick. I have to interrupt for a second.
Yeah, no worries.
The name of the bakery is the Raw Dog Bakery. That ain't right. I'm sorry. That's a weird name. That is a really weird name for a bakery, man.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these episodes are written by these kind of like goon guys who were like, drinking way too much. And they kind of needed to like blow off steam. Like if you watch the old He-Man cartoons, like all of like the Ram Man innuendo.
Oh yeah, yeah. I like my bakery raw.
yeah, but those 80s action shows were just really formative for me. I mean, and they made me want to write, and they made me want to tell stories, and I'm sort of they influence a lot of stuff, and it really veers into the G.I. Joe lane because this is something that I don't know, maybe you've done a lot of these episodes, so maybe you've talked about this, but maybe you haven't in terms of the G.I. Joe connection to these shows. So G.I. Joe was massively popular. They're like 3 3/4 inch figures. And so like anyone who was doing a TV show at that time that had a show that appealed to kids at all, they wanted to sort of capitalize, they wanted to like ride G.I. Joe's coattails. So all of these shows put out 3 3/4 inch versions of their characters. And so I still have them in my office, and I showed them to you earlier. Some of my most prized possessions are my Magnum PI Ferrari with Thomas Magnum and TC figure, my Hardcastle McCormick Coyote with Mark McCormick figure, my A-Team van with the entire A-Team. I have Chips like Ponch and John.
Oh, that's great.
Figures. They're awesome, and they're hard to find. Some of them are very expensive. I think the Magnum Ferrari is up to like $700 on eBay.
Wow. I had the Greatest American Hero figures.
Oh wow!
And I sold them on eBay a few years back for a good sum. Like they sold for good money. Yeah.
Yeah, they're hard to get a hold of. So that was one of my favorite things. Is like when I would play G.I. Joe, I played G.I. Joe with Mark McCormick. So Cobra's trying to get away, and Duke and Mark McCormick jump on the Coyote and go race him down. So my G.I. Joe experience was maybe a little bit different than everybody else's, but I had a lot of fun.
That's really cool.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
And Mr. T won a lot of those Kumite tournaments. So.
Listen, man, I've said it before on the show. I love Mr. T. I still love Mr. T. I've always loved Mr. T. He is an amazing follow on Twitter. I don't know if you follow him on Twitter. Yeah, you need to. And when you read his tweets, you need to read it in his voice. It's amazing. Everything he talks about, you read it as Mr. T, and your life is better. Your life is absolutely better.
He has an incredible line of children's books also called Mr. T and Me.
Shut up. I didn't know that.
That you can still get on Amazon. Some of them are a little bit Jesus-y, and depending on how, on how you swing, that can...
Yeah, I feel like T's a man who loves him some church.
Yeah, that can be a little off-putting, but they're really funny.
Yeah, so Alcatraz now is getting attacked by a bunch of Cobra Undertow, and they're assaulting... It's a big prison breakout. Baroness leading the group. Pursuant to your question earlier, why couldn't they just take over Alcatraz without actually being captured?
Yeah,
because it's not like their escape is based on being inside.
Yeah,
like you know what I'm saying? They attacked from the outside.
Yeah, well, they really just want to stage. They want to be able to stage an attack, an assault on the submarine. And I don't know why they have to go to prison,
right?
Break into the prison first. It's just a lot of business. You know what I'm saying? Just stage in a field and go attack San Francisco.
It's filler. Yeah, it's a lot of like time filler.
Yeah.
Where I feel like they're so the DIC ones have suffered from this. There's been a handful of 2-part episodes, and well, we're gonna go to commercial and be right back. And I got a theory on this. Hey listeners, I'm not sure if you've heard the news, but Joe and Joe has started a Patreon, and I'm inviting you along for the ride. Go to patreon.com/JoeandJoePod and check out my page. Right now, there are 2 opportunities for you to help support the show. You can choose to be a grunt or a viper. Grunts get access to all the Joe and Joe episodes and early access to new episodes as they're created. Vipers get all that and access to my all-new spin-off podcast, Joe and Joe Illustrated, where I will be breaking down every single issue of the G.I. Joe comic books page by page in the deepest dive you'll ever hear on G.I. Joe. So go to patreon.com/JoeandJoePod and see what's happening over at the Fort Wadsworth Motor Pool. We'll see you there. So I don't know if I have answers to the thing, but I do know that in almost all these 2-parters for Sunbow, they've suffered from lack of plot.
Sure.
They've suffered from a fun idea or fun concept, but they don't add enough to it. So if you think back to the stuff with like the Springfield 2-parter with Shipwreck, that first part was a full, complete story where like it ends on a cliffhanger, but like it's like there's a arc and moment to it. Yep. These all feel like, in this one too, it just feels like one episode cut in half instead of 2 whole episodes. Same thing as Worlds Without End. Same way. The first episode was awesome and complete, big cliffhanger, and then you get an awesome and complete one. And that's not what's happening with all these DIC 2-parters. Yeah,
it's a lot of wheel spinning, a lot of just complication for complication's sake, and it doesn't really add up. They're not really worried about the logic like they used to be.
Right.
That was the thing, is like those, those early episodes. I mean,
hold on. Destro is doing an amazing impersonation of Pathfinder's voice. Like there is no voice modulator there.
Well, isn't he speaking into something? I thought he was speaking into something.
Oh wait, was he? Did I miss that?
I think so.
Oh, you're right. You're right. There is.
Yeah, he's putting it between the phone. Yeah,
yes,
he has like the thing from Scream. Like, hello.
It is. Yeah. What's your favorite scary movie, Sydney?
Yeah. I love the Iron Grenadier gold outfit. That
it's a good looking outfit, man. It's a good looking outfit.
Good way to sell more figures.
For sure.
Yeah. So, like how bad is Captain Gridiron at his job? Like his best guys tried to warn him like 5 times that this was going down, and he just pushed him away. He's like, oh no, that's not happening.
He trusted in The Rock. He trusted in Alcatraz, Rylend. He trusted in the strength of Alcatraz.
Yeah, another interesting point about him is that apparently he does a mean John Wayne impersonation. I don't know if he does it in the cartoon, but on his file card it says that. And I think the file card says that like he annoys people with his John Wayne impersonation.
Oh. Well, let's call it up, Captain Gridiron. Here we go. Now, Rylend, one thing we love to do on this show is we love to ask our guests if you could be a member of the Joe or Cobra team.
Nice.
What would you be? What would your skill be? And let's get a name for you. Let's get some specific skill sets for you.
Get a name. So, oh wow. So this is what I think I would be. I would be the cook on the USS Flag.
Okay.
But what people wouldn't know is that I was before a very skilled Navy SEAL who decked his commanding officer.
So hold on a second. That sounds familiar.
I believe maybe they touched on some of this ground in the movie Under Siege.
Under Siege, or perhaps you're more familiar with Under Siege 2: Dark Territory.
Dark Territory, yeah. And so what would happen is that Cobra would try to take over the USS Flag, and they would make sure that all the Joes were accounted for, but they wouldn't account for the cook.
Right.
And so I would go all diehard on the USS Flag, and I would pick Cobra apart piece by piece and take the flag back.
I love that.
So I don't know, should I just call myself Casey Ryback? Or
no, I bet. So we'll say no. In the spirit of the file cards, your name would be like Racy Kyback or Ryback Casey. Like they would do that. Like they would take a real person's name and just flip it.
Yeah.
So that would be your file card name.
Yeah.
But you'd be. Would it be like
Insu or something like that?
How about short order?
Short order is awesome. Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, you're short
better,
order.
You're much better at this than I am.
I've been doing it for a while.
I might have you start naming people in my scripts.
Oh my
Short
God,
order is
let's
amazing.
talk. Absolutely. Yeah, you're short order. You're the cook on the USS Flag, who used to be a highly trained Navy SEAL until he got. And the only reason you didn't get run out of this man's Navy is because you're so good at what you do. They couldn't. They're like, we've invested too much money into you, short order. We've put too much of Uncle Sugar's tax dollars into your training. You're gonna work it off here in the mess hall of the USS Flag.
Yeah. Also, the Admiral really likes my pot pies.
Also that. Yes. Yes, he does.
So he's never going to let me go.
Specifically the pot pies. I love that.
No, and I can just see the episode right now, and it's like, and when I finally radio, the Joes who are like, who have been taken away, I'm like, don't worry, I'm going to take the ship back in short order. Boom!
That's so good. So that's so good. Welcome to Joe
Now
on Joe.
with Crisco.
So Cobra has succeeded in and I've watched the show a couple times now. They're referring it as the Comstock load, and it's because it's a mystery of what the device is. And the only thing I can think of is the reason they're not saying, because they want what happens to be a surprise to us, the viewer. You follow?
Yeah, sure.
Like they're not saying like, because it's an EMP device.
Yeah, it's an EMP device.
Right. But they're not saying that so that when the end of this episode happens, it's like, oh my gosh, what just happened? They used this crazy, so just.
I mean, it's like we all know what an EMP is now.
Right.
But I feel like nobody knew what an EMP was back in.
It's a good point. It's a really good point. You're right. You're totally right. Yeah. So it's happening right now. It's and it's actually not a bomb though. This is interesting. It's more of a pulse.
Yeah.
So they've kind of like turned it on. It's not, typically it's like a, like a bomb goes off and it's, what have you. So now we've Cobra Commander's explaining it, and it's pulsing out, and it's going to protect the sub. So somehow the sub itself is shielded from it, and it's shutting down everyone's communication or everyone's electronics. So all these Skyhawks from the Sky Patrol, they're going to crash into the water.
Now see, you could insert me right here. Like, what if I was the cook on the submarine?
Yeah. Oh,
I could totally take it back in the next episode.
If this was your intro episode, you would have been the cook on that. And then after you save the day at the end of the episode, Captain Gridiron's like, short order, you got to join the Joes. And it's like, yeah. And then they all salute you. And then you're a member from there on. That's like how Scoop joined. That's how everyone joins the Joes.
Yeah,
That's how Shipwreck joined and Quick Kick joined. So
they met Shipwreck in like a bar or something, didn't they?
Oh, totally. He was like just a drunk hanging out in a seedy bar in the Cobra part of town, and they're like, "We like the cut of your jib. Why don't you join us?" He's like, "All right."
So incredible.
I got a parrot that talks. Can I bring him?
Yeah, I was gonna say, bring your parrot.
Yeah.
You and the bird. You're with
Totally.
us.
It's so great. Yeah. Well, this was awesome, Rylend. This was great, man. So, what did you think of the episode in full?
I mean, I think it's fun. I haven't watched one of these in a really long time, and it was really great to revisit with it. I want to go back and watch all of them again. I want to watch all of them, and I want to go back. I want to go back and read through the comics. You have, the Joe fire is always kind of burning with me. You've poured a bunch of gasoline on it.
Oh.
It's just raging now. So thank you for that.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, listen, it was a real pleasure getting to know you, and thank you so much for being on the show today, guys. For sure, everyone out there listening, you have to go get Aberrant. Find Aberrant. So it's Aberrant refers to like the guy, like a metahuman kind of power. Instead of saying mutant or metahuman, it's like they're aberrant, right? Like they're abnormal.
Yeah. It's kind of a derogatory term for someone with powers.
Yeah.
So
find it. It's from Action Lab. It's out there. They're the same company that brought us Baby Badass, and I know all you listeners went out there and picked up Baby Badass.
Yeah, available at your local comic shop.
Absolutely.
That should be the first stop. If for some reason your local comic shop isn't carrying it. It's on Amazon. It's on Comixology.
Yep. And just ask them to order it. Just any local comic shop worth their salt will order 1, 2, 3 copies of a comic. Like the shops don't have to order, 10, 15 copies of every comic. They'll be like, oh,
Absolutely.
I have 2 readers that want to read this comic book. Yes. Diamond, send me 2 copies of Aberrant,
Support your local comic shop.
Agree 100%. Absolutely. So, yeah, and if you're going to San Diego Comic-Con, go see Rylend. Go see him at the booth. Go see him on his panels. And when you're, hopefully, the projects that are in the pipeline, hopefully they go forward, and, we'll have you back on the show, and we'll talk about that.
Whenever you're short somebody, call Short Order. He'll be there in short order.
Well, I love it. Short Order, thank you so much. Welcome to the Joe on Joe team. And now you Joe, and Joeing is half the battle.
Rock and roll.
I was more of a roadblock guy.